On October 24th, 1942, a 26-year-old Marine from Raritan, New Jersey named John Basilone faced a situation that would test the absolute limits of human endurance and courage. What happened over the next 36 hours would become one of the most extraordinary examples of individual heroism ever recorded in military history. This is his story, and it deserves to be told completely because it challenges everything we think we know about what one person can accomplish under impossible circumstances. The context is crucial to understanding what made that night so significant. The Battle of Guadalcanal had been raging for months. American military strategy in the Pacific War depended on controlling a small airfield on this remote island in the Solomon Islands. Without control of Henderson Field, named after a fallen pilot, the Japanese could continue their aggressive expansion across the Pacific. American forces had landed and taken the airfield, but holding it proved far more difficult than anyone anticipated. By late October, intelligence indicated that the Japanese were planning a major counteroffensive. The Americans strengthened their defensive positions, preparing for what they knew would be a serious assault. Basilone's machine gun section was positioned along the defensive perimeter, right in the path where military planners predicted the main attack would come. He had recently been promoted to sergeant and was placed in charge of 2 sections of heavy machine guns. This was one of the most critical positions in a defensive battle because everything depended on firepower. What nobody fully anticipated was just how massive the attack would actually be. When the Japanese launched their assault on the night of October 24th, approximately 3,000 soldiers from the Sendai Division moved forward to attack American positions. 3,000 trained soldiers equipped with rifles, grenades, mortars, and their own machine guns, against American forces that were, by comparison, spread thin across a wide defensive perimeter. Around 9:30 p.m. on that October night, the darkness was shattered by the sounds of battle. Japanese artillery and mortars began shelling American positions. Then came the distinctive sound of thousands of soldiers moving forward through the jungle and across open ground. The attack was organized and determined. This wasn't a small probe or a desperate charge. This was a coordinated regimental assault designed to break through American lines and recapture the airfield. The enemy was hammering at the Marines' defensive positions with everything they had. Basilone and his machine gun crews prepared themselves. An M1919 machine gun section in World War II typically consisted of gunners, ammunition handlers, and support personnel. The M1919 machine gun could fire approximately 400 to 500 rounds per minute against an attacking force moving across open or semi-open ground. A well-positioned machine gun was one of the most devastating weapons available on any battlefield. But it also required constant attention, ammunition supply, and soldiers willing to operate it under the most intense enemy fire imaginable. When the order came, Basilone opened fire. The distinctive sound of the machine gun began its rhythmic hammering. Rounds poured downrange toward the attacking Japanese soldiers. For the first time that night, some of the attacks were stopped. Bodies fell. The Japanese assault hesitated, but it didn't stop completely. It reorganized and came forward again from a different angle. This pattern repeated throughout the night. Attack, resistance, reorganization, new attack. The fighting continued relentlessly with no pause for rest or relief. As the battle wore on, something unexpected and dangerous began to happen. One of Basilone's machine gun sections, with its gun crews, was put out of action by enemy grenades and mortar fire. Suddenly, one of his 2 sections was gone. Only 2 men from that section were still able to carry on fighting. The loss of firepower at such a critical moment was catastrophic. But Basilone didn't hesitate. He immediately moved an extra gun into position and placed it in action. Then, under continual fire from enemy positions, he repaired another damaged gun and personally manned it himself. The courage required for what Basilone did cannot be overstated. He was operating a machine gun under direct enemy fire, with grenades and mortar shells exploding around his position. He was the target of enemy fire from multiple directions. Any moment, a sniper's bullet or a mortar round could end his life. But he kept firing. He kept holding the line. He gallantly held his position until replacement Marines arrived to help reinforce his line. But the battle was far from over. A little later in the fighting, With ammunition critically low and the supply lines cut off, Basilone faced another decision point. The Japanese were continuing their assault, and his machine guns were running dangerously low on ammunition. Without bullets, the guns were useless. Without the guns, the line would collapse. Some men would have given up. Some would have decided it was hopeless. But Basilone was made of different stuff. At great risk of his life, and in the face of continued enemy attack, Basilone battled his way through hostile lines with urgently needed ammunition for his gunners. He physically moved through the battlefield under fire, carrying shells that his guns desperately needed. Think about what that means. He left his protected position. He moved through open ground where enemy soldiers were actively trying to kill him. He gathered ammunition, and he brought it back to his guns so they could continue firing. From his emplacement and through his actions that night, Basilone personally killed 38 Japanese soldiers. 38 individual enemy combatants fell to his machine gun fire. But more important than any individual kill count was what his actions meant for the overall battle. He contributed in large measure to the virtual annihilation of a Japanese regiment. An entire regiment of Japanese soldiers, attacking in organized formation, was stopped by American forces, and Basilone's position was the critical point that held. When dawn finally broke over Guadalcanal on October 25th, something remarkable had occurred. The Japanese assault force, which had started with approximately 3,000 soldiers, had been reduced to a fraction of that number. Conservative military estimates suggested that between 1,500 and 2,000 Japanese soldiers had been killed or seriously wounded. The attack had been stopped. The airfield remained in American hands. The defensive line had held, and out of the entire group under Basilone's command, only 3 Marines had survived the night. Only 3 men out of all those who had fought in that position lived to see daylight. Basilone's actions at Guadalcanal were recognized immediately for their exceptional nature. The United States military awarded him the Medal of Honor, the nation's highest military decoration. President Franklin D. Roosevelt personally signed the citation. The Marine Corps citation read, "For extraordinary heroism and conspicuous gallantry in action against enemy Japanese forces above and beyond the call of duty." Basilone was suddenly famous. The Marine Corps requested that he participate in war bond tours, traveling around the country speaking about his experience and encouraging Americans to support the war effort financially. He became one of the most recognizable faces of the Marine Corps during World War II. What's important to understand is that Basilone's actions at Guadalcanal did far more than simply survive a single night of battle. That one position, held by 3 men and 2 machine guns, prevented a breakthrough that could have had much larger strategic consequences. The successful defense of Henderson Field allowed American forces to continue their operations and eventually push back the Japanese advance. One person's actions on one night rippled outward to affect the entire campaign, the entire war, and ultimately millions of lives. Despite his fame and the recognition he received, Basilone didn't seek to leave the Marine Corps. Despite being offered positions as a war bond speaker and trainer, despite being a national hero, he requested to continue serving in combat. When a Marine Corps planned the assault on Iwo Jima, one of the most brutal battles of the entire Pacific War, Basilone asked to be included. He was promoted to Gunnery Sergeant. He returned to combat not as a rear area officer, but as a frontline leader. On February 19, 1945, the first day of the assault on Iwo Jima, Basilone was leading his men on the black sands of Red Beach 2. Enemy gunfire was intense and pinned down his platoon. Everyone was hunkered down, trying to stay alive under the blistering fire. But not Basilone. He walked straight up, kicking and yelling, "Get off the beach! Move out!" He was leading by example, by action, by personal courage. Before his final moments, he single-handedly destroyed a Japanese blockhouse, allowing his unit to advance and capture critical ground. He was leading a Marine tank through a minefield under direct enemy fire, directing it to safety when an enemy artillery round exploded nearby. Gunnery Sergeant John Basilone was killed instantly, along with 4 other members of his platoon. He was only 27 years old. On his outstretched left arm was a tattoo that read "Death before dishonor." After the war, his body was reburied with full military honors in Arlington National Cemetery. He was posthumously awarded the Navy Cross for his actions at Iwo Jima. This made John Basilone the only enlisted Marine in the history of the United States to receive both the Medal of Honor and the Navy Cross during World War II. No one else achieved this distinction. His story has endured because it represents something fundamental about human determination and sacrifice that transcends any particular time period or circumstance. When faced with an impossible situation, he didn't give up. When circumstances demanded that he risk his life to protect others, he did it without hesitation. When he became famous and could have stayed safely behind the lines, he chose to return to combat. He didn't fight for recognition or rewards. He fought because that was what the moment demanded. His commitment extended to his final moments on a beach in the Pacific. In our modern context, where media often focuses on entertainment and instant gratification, stories like John Basilone's serve a different purpose. They remind us that individual choice, individual courage, and individual commitment can matter in ways that seem almost impossible until they actually happen. An entire attacking force of 3,000 soldiers couldn't break through one position because 3 Marines refused to let them. That's not superhuman. That's human potential operating at its absolute maximum. That's what happens when ordinary people face extraordinary circumstances and refuse to break.